To all, and we are excited to be here. First, let me just ask for your forgiveness for last week. We had a couple of things that were going on. One of the things, traveling on the road, sometimes we can't find a link or a signal that is strong enough to be able to carry us, and so we're back this week, and we are a little bit early for those who catch us live, but you can catch us on repeat, on Restream, and all the other platforms. So good morning there.
Good morning. Good morning. Last week, actually, I was traveling as well.
How are you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was in Corpus Christi dropping off my daughter. She's starting her first big girl job,
Okay.
if you
All right.
will. So, for all you that do not know me, I'm Darren Fulcher. I'm an attorney, local attorney in Kansas City, Missouri area. And I always say I'm a father, brother, friend, and a follower of Christ.
All right. So your daughter is, so she just graduated college.
She graduated from Syracuse with a degree in television, radio, and film.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll be working for a local radio, television station, producing one of their shows, an I believe, evening news show, the 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock show.
All right.
So that's
get her on here one of these days to give us some insight on what the media world is like behind the scenes.
Yeah, I know that is her sort of thing. She has worked for a production company in Los Angeles. She writes scripts, so that's what she does. And it's good that she was able to get one of those, it's like a internship, like it's a CNN affiliate where she can become an executive producer after her 2-year contract.
Oh, it's a good deal.
So
she's in the news media right now today is more controversial than we've ever seen it be, because like no other time, we have seen the media, almost a media takeover by the government administration, by the federal government. So
yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting scenario. Well, let's get into this conversation today, and I want to let the starting video kind of get us started in this conversation that's taking place. And the topic today is complex conversations around Carmelo Anthony in the case, the murder case that came with a verdict that surprised some, and some say it was well-deserving. So let's take a look at that.
While the defense suggests that he went directly to the people in charge. There was an athletic trainer, Tiffany Whitaker, who was on the stand, and she said that she instructed another coach, Vincent Hooper, not to let Carmelo leave the area. So what do these actions say about murder or self-defense? Let's bring back in our guests who've been talking with us all hour on this one. We have criminal defense attorneys Lateef Gray and Al Wunsch. Great to have you both on. Al, let me start with you. We talked about it a little bit before, but the words that he said afterward, if there was any remorse, and we'll get to some of the details of those words are going to be important, but just first, the actions. He walked to some point, and then you have a coach that says, don't let him leave. We don't know if that means he was trying to leave or if he was waiting for those coaches. The defense is characterizing it one way versus the other. But that action itself, how important is that to the jury's determination?
Well, if it looks like he's trying to leave, I mean, obviously there is look, there was no way he was getting away at this point anyway. They had enough people that were able to identify him, and it was obviously a confusing situation. But, his actions are always going to be looked at, and going with where it happened at the moment, anything he does is going to be magnified a dozen times.
The words of the witness who was on the stand. So this is a prosecution witness. This is Vincent Hooper. He's a head football coach at Heritage High. So that's not a school that's associated with Carmelo Anthony or the stabbing victim, Austin Metcalf. But this is a track meet. There are lots of schools and coaches there. And he said on the stand, I put my arm around him and asked, what did you do? And then Carmelo Anthony responded, he, meaning Austin Metcalf, put his hands on me. And the witness said, you know, if he dies, you just changed the rest of your life. Carmelo's response was, he's not going to die. Then I said, but if he does? And Carmelo then starts crying like it's just now registering. On cross-examination of this same witness, this coach said that he doesn't think that Carmelo Anthony actually thought that Austin was going to die. He was crying. I believe his emotions were genuine. Carmelo did not try to run from me, was another point brought up on cross-examination. Latif, what are these words telling you? It sounds like there's remorse, but does remorse negate an intent to murder?
Well, it appears that there is remorse. It's showing me that maybe he didn't mean to kill this person, which it sounds like, for all intents and purposes, he didn't mean to kill this person. But I don't know that this will save the day.
You know, I mean, I have to hand it to the coach, you know, he's trying to calm him down. He's trying to keep him, you know, he's trying to keep him in the place there and everything else. And he's having a life lesson with him, which, I mean, you know, basically you're right. This is a horrible thing. And, you know, if this kid dies, your life has changed forever. But once again, you know, he put his hand on me or whatever. This still doesn't mean anything, except that I will say that it makes me feel somewhat good that you know, Carmelo is showing some remorse on this, and that, you know, that is at least a human response with regards to same, and that may help a jury say maybe this was not, you know, murder, it was manslaughter. So
Al, does that mean he takes the stand? A follow-up, Al, does that mean he should take the stand, or is this speaking enough for him?
No, he has to take enough. He has to take the stand. He has to take the stand. He has to be able to tell why he had that knife with him.
Okay. So I started with that case because at that particular point, they don't know the verdict. And they're just talking about the trial, the case, and as things begin to go on. And I really wanted to, so maybe we should review the case for those who are not as familiar with it. So you want to kind of give a summary, or you have some thoughts, or tell me where you want to start?
Well, this is okay. The case, which I didn't follow as much early on. My daughter, who I was just speaking of earlier, asked me about it probably a couple weeks ago. And we start having a discussion. Then I start looking more into it, because I originally, when it happened, it was a young kid who allegedly got into a fight with a black young man, got into a fight with a white kid and his brother a week or two prior to an incident. That's what the background was, I believe. And these boys had jumped him, is what they...
So basically, what had happened is there was a track meet going on, and there were a number of teams that was there, and it started to rain, and the rain stopped the track meet. This kid, Carmelo, his team did not have a tent. So what they would do is put tents up in the bleachers to protect themselves from the weather or the sun. In this case, it was the weather. Now, this is outside of Texas where this is taking place.
Yeah, but I think prior to that, they had a fight.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just know the incident.
But prior to that incident, these boys had gotten into it.
Okay.
And so there's a background to this. The story is that these boys had gotten into a fight and they had jumped Carmelo.
Okay.
Then and he knew these boys that didn't go to school, but these boys had jumped him before. And so that's the mindset of him going into it, as these boys had jumped me before. And so therefore so that's when the incident happened, because they were coming to beat him up again.
Okay. So that part didn't come out.
I know that didn't come out.
Case.
Yes.
As a part of the case law. I mean, as part of the transcripts. So basically, what it shows in terms of the case, or these are what was allowable in court, because that that could have changed the mindset and gave some legal stretch to his to the threat that he felt under at that particular time. But that people can kind of capture the case. So what ends up happening is the kid is invited. He's out in the rain. He's invited under the tent. He gets under the tent, and so a number of these kids come over to tell him, leading with the kid who ended up deceased. He was, I believe, leading the charge to tell the kid to get away from under the tent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were a few that kind of was accented in court. One of them was when he said, "Touch me, you're gonna see what happens." While he's reaching in his bag, so having a legal pocket knife, it was not like he took a knife that could be considered one that was intent, which raises the question as to why first degree was even a case. It was even an option. But anyway, so the kid ends up, when the guy pushed him, he ends up taking his knife out, and I think there were a number of kids that had started to approach him, but he ended up stabbing this kid, and then everything kind of transpired from there. So, yeah. So go ahead. You were going to say.
No, I was just going to say, well, there are a number of things. I think, and I don't know if I mentioned this before in this podcast, but African American boys are seen as a threat in society. And I'll give you an example. My nephew was at a local mall shooting a paint gun years ago. At the time, he was 16, 17. And a group of boys are shooting a paint gun. And they were playing around outside the mall. They end up shooting another kid who wasn't part of their group because they were shooting at each other. In Overland Park, Kansas, Johnson County, Kansas, family mall. And the white kid goes home and told his parents that he got shot with a paint gun. Parents go to the police. They began to investigate. They look at cameras. They saw they go to my nephew's school, which is in Missouri, and arrest him. He got charged with aggravated assault. Looking at 15 years in prison for shooting a paint gun. And I remember having a conversation with the prosecutor, and he didn't know this was my nephew. And I said, these were boys out having fun, stupid as it was. And they were shooting, stop signs and things like that. But you and I have both done worse as kids. And he agreed. And then he goes, "Oh, it's your nephew?" And of course, everything changed. But originally, they just saw him as a black kid no one cared about. And they were willing to throw him away. And that's what society does oftentimes when they make these charges. They charge as much as they can. And we've seen this with sentencing. And that was the issue of critical race theory in law school. And is looking at the way they charge, the way they sentence, the disparity in these cases.
Right. So here's, I guess, some of the thought is, and I know that to me, I mean, since I was younger, and because all of my friends weren't black, and so therefore I understood how I was treated if I had a degree of proximity to whiteness. If I had a white guy in the car, it changes my whole experience. If I had a white guy in court, it changes my whole experience. Everything begins to change based on proximity to whiteness. Now, I have a lengthy theory about kind of why that is systemic. But I would say first, and this is kind of my concern when I say, like, our generation, especially as it relates to my grandparents, were very, very, the talk that we have about the police that our parents had with us. The police stop you, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The talk that my grandfather had was very, very clear, that says you don't expect to be treated fairly and don't expect to be treated like them. So the idea of even having a paint gun, or even in that particular situation, to think that I will be given the benefit of doubt as it relates to self-defense. I am not legally justified defending myself as a black man.
So, but looking at the case, okay, and whenever you use the defense of self-defense,
Mhm.
you do not get the. It's an intentional act legally. So
Mhm.
the strategy by his defense counsel was to claim that it was an intentional act. So therefore, then you get the charge of murder, first degree murder. That's the problem. Now, if he had argued a sudden passion, then you get the lesser included.
Right, but I do agree. I think
So,
that the
so the
sudden
legal
passion,
strategy was. I mean, I'm not going. I'm not going to Monday day quarterback. But the thing of it is this. So the jury was left with that, and the prosecutor was left with that charge because of the way the defense chose to defend Carmelo. That's one thing.
but I think that now I wasn't there, of course, in pre-trial discussions or anything like that. But I think what he said at the time, which you're not supposed to say anything if you get into a situation like that because you leave limitations to your defense. But what he said was he said it was self-defense.
I understand, and so, and I understand what he said. He said they put their hands on him, and so, but that could be an excited utterance, meaning I could still use that as, it was a sudden passion. He was defending himself in sudden passion,
Mhm.
and still get that in without claiming self-defense. So it's not an intentional act.
So would you
So
have put
he's
him
looking.
on the stand?
Don't know because I don't know. I mean, I would have to know the kid,
Mhm.
the circumstance, but I don't like. See, there are a number of things that were going on here, and I don't like it when people say that race is not an issue ever.
Right.
Race is always an issue, and race is an issue when the prosecutor purposely struck every single black juror that could be on that jury,
Mhm.
and the judge allowed him to do it. So, you know, when you have, I don't know the black population of Texas or that county.
I think it was 40, if I remember right. So the county. Here's what I have read in terms of statistical elements. The county used to be predominantly white,
Mm-hmm.
by a large percentage, but over the last, I guess, few years, it has gotten to a point where it was like 42%,
Mm-hmm.
42% minority, and so the makeup of the jury pool should have been way more balanced, and I think you can argue that in appeal.
Yes. And so, I mean, so there are a number of things that are going on and then he's a 17-year-old kid, 16, 17-year-old kid. The prosecutor chose to charge him as adult. Again, that's that concept of looking at African American men as a threat, and then charging them differently than he would charge any other person in this country, white guy, young white man. Because those stabbings have happened before in schools when white kids have done that. And they've been statistically the same similar incident charged differently.
Mhm.
Even in
Now,
Texas, charged differently.
and I think also some of the issues have been centered around. I do think that you can't ignore the fact that it was about race, and I think that particular county, which is close to Dallas, have been, there's been an influx in minority folks that are there. Kind of, now, these are all social issues more than legal issues. And so the other social dynamic that has sparked some frustration around this one is that, what you said earlier, it is in the middle of a time when many other cases have demonstrated a very different approach and of course a very, very different outcome. In fact, the guy who shot the kid running from the Asian guy who shot the kid running from the store, which the kid looked at some water, put the water back. He began walking out. They accused him of having something, and he says he didn't. And then and so then they come after him, and so he's running because they're coming after him, and ends up shooting him in the back. And that guy walks free. You also had another case, I think, where a guy just came out and was shooting. Even the guy who came out and started shooting at the picnic, or the I should say cookout, family reunion, white guy comes out, starts calling people a bunch of names. They chose to ignore him. He goes back and comes back with the firearm and starts shooting at the folks. I would say, even dare say, in that situation, had they killed this guy in self-defense, so to speak, I think it still would have been controversial because of the race.
And it would have been. And then think about this. And I think I read yesterday or the day before that his bond was set at $5,000.
And it was not domestic terrorism, which would have been what it would seem like the crime is classified.
Yes. And so and I always say this, like in relationships. When you love me, you give me the benefit of the doubt. Because I am always willing and ready to give my kids the benefit of the doubt, my family the benefit of the doubt, because I want them to prove me wrong if I'm thinking ill of them. In this country, rarely do we see African Americans get the benefit of the doubt. But being white, and that's where white privilege comes in. White privilege comes in because their white skin gives them the benefit of the doubt in a lot of most scenarios. It's when you're dealing with the authorities or whoever else. They give them the benefit of the doubt. They want to hear their side of the story, and they want to believe their side of the story. And they go out of their way to help them out, especially when they're dealing with Black people. Because we never get the benefit of the doubt. And so we know that the system doesn't love us, doesn't care for us.
Well, see, I think there's a guy, and he told a story. I wish I had the video, but he talks about. So he starts off talking about how this lady, there's a friend of his, really good friend of his, happens to be a white guy, and his mother started talking about when they had their mammy. They said, she said, we had this nigger, our nigger, and we loved our nigger. And she continued to call her a nigger, blah, blah, blah. She goes on, she did this to us. She was her nanny. And so this lady was up in her 70s, so the nanny probably was deceased by now, or would have had to be in her 100 years old, or at least 90. So anyway, but she talks about it. She goes on and on and on and on. And then what he said, he observed and heard at the particular time is how much this lady loved her nanny. And then he said, but in reflection, he wondered whether she could eat at the same table as them, and whether she could drink from the same glass they drank from, the same plate. Did she get the same quality of food? Did she get the same opportunity for fellowship? And so he said, so he thought I loved his dog. He had a dog, and his dog died. But he was talking about how much he could say everything about his feelings for the dog that she could say about her nanny. However, the dog couldn't eat at the table with us. The dog didn't get the same quality food for us. The dog didn't do all those different kinds of things. And he said, because the difference is, whether you love them or not is not what matters. It's how human they are. So no matter how much she talked about this nanny and loved her, she still systemically dehumanized her. And I think that's so what I hear a lot of whites say is that they talk about their feelings toward black people.
Hmm.
But systemically, if you dehumanize someone, how you feel about them doesn't show up in your emotions towards them as much as it does the allowance of equality and humanization. And I think that, yeah, I think we in this country are dehumanized, and we're dehumanized because I think we're arguing for, and this is where white privilege comes in, I think, what most whites don't see. We're arguing for what they were given because of skin color. Because if you look at the civil rights argument is whether or not I should have rights and privileges at an equal level under the Constitution. And the Constitution once said no. And so we've been arguing, really, I would go all the way back to the 1790 law when they gave it to them and said, this is how you determine who has all rights and privileges, civil and legally. You have to be white. And so
Yeah.
later, they never came back and said, you do not have to be white. You could be of any race. You could be, that's never happened. So therefore, the legal privileges are embedded in the system until you go back and equalize how it was distributed in the first place.
And I think the I think we use the wrong terminology when we say privilege. Okay, I've been thinking about this. I think it's more white
Right, well,
preference.
right, preference. Okay. Your mic
White
is
preference.
delaying a
The
little bit.
reason I say that is because even in our society, that's what white supremacy is. We prefer white over black, and therefore
You
the
see,
privilege
I don't
or
think it's,
black, white over anything. White is, and they put white in this hierarchy, but it's a preference in our society. And I would say this, even with our own people,
but see, I would,
they have a.
here's,
Go ahead.
here's where I would push back on that a little bit, because a social preference is very different from a legal privilege.
Agree.
So when we start talking about, like, because I don't care if somebody doesn't prefer me because I'm black. I mean, it has nothing to do with it. I think when the law, the thing that could affect my life, because your decision or opinion about me is not going to change any dynamics unless you have a legal advantage, and systemically, I have no recourse.
And you're talking about, and I know you're talking about an individual level, okay?
I'm
But
talking
in
about
the
at a systemic
law,
level.
no, I know on systemic level, it is so the law is preferring white people that gives them their privilege, and so the law gives them the upper hand in the relationship, if you will, and that's where their privilege stems from, is that preference. So they prefer, like, okay, so for instance, let's say in the Trump administration, and the there's a preference right now for white incompetent men
Right,
in his cabinet.
okay.
Okay, and so white people get a privilege from that preference.
Right, but I would say that you're speaking at a very social level. I think the fact that if I had a privilege, regardless to his preference, just like when the civil rights movement, before we start gutting it, there was uh, a legal effort for equality of privilege. So let's go back first.
No, but it was never realized because they always preferred whites. So that privilege was never realized, and it's
But I
because
think
of
that
the
that's at the social level, though. I think that
yes, and at the social
but,
level, they
but
prefer to
right,
be
but
around.
when you go dating, you get a preference based on what you like. If I'm hiring somebody, there is a degree to where I have some preference. So, but I don't think there's no legal recourse regarding that because the system didn't give you the preference. The system gave you the privilege. The system said, when it comes to constitutional protections, it's not a preference, it's a privilege. When it comes to constitutional protections, then the standard default of all rights and privileges under the Constitution, protections, all of that stuff go automatically to people under the umbrella of whiteness.
That's because they preferred white people.
But I mean, I think
Okay, so for instance, with Stephen Miller right now, in the White House and his war on immigrants, basically the war on people of color. That war is because he preferred this country to be all white.
Right, but the right to
and so I know, and so he's using that his preference and baking it in to a law that gives the privilege. And I understand that what you're saying, the privilege, the outcome is a privilege. But the initial
No, I'm talking about the initiation was the privilege.
I say the initiation is the preference that gave the privilege.
Well, I don't know if you can say that. I think that, and here's the reason why I say that. I mean, you can say that, but I don't know if I can work that out practically, because what happened was in 17. Everybody knows this by now. 1790. They wanted to determine, and it was not unlike anybody from Europe to have the argument about what a Hitlerist idea was, because that's what they wore over all the time. Like, what is the greatest national? They thought they could create a great nation by having the purest nation bloodline in their particular thing. I mean, that's kind of an England thing, and it just goes on and on. So they were fighting to figure out who was the best, most pure nation back then, and they were trying to find pure human beings, whatever that was. So when they started saying, how do we do it in America? Then they said they determined to develop a new category called whiteness. And the whiteness, there's been debates over the years about who fits under whiteness.
Yeah, but the thing of it is it's based on it
Like
is absolutely it's based on their
the Irish. They didn't prefer the Irish.
They didn't prefer the Irish until.
And then what happened was they put them under whiteness, right?
Because
so once you put them under whiteness, then it became preference. So the preference didn't come first.
Yeah, but the preference did come first because the preference was white, and so the preference is white, and
but
so
there was
therefore
no such thing as white.
Understand that, but the preference was me versus you or whomever else. The preference was white, and so therefore, it is permeated their science, is permeated how they their worldview, is permeated their religion, because I don't call them. They can call themselves Christian all they want to. But it's permeated everything. So when God says, I'm not a respecter of persons, he says, I don't have a preference. So that's what it is. And so the issue is a respecter of persons, which tied to a preference. And that preference bestows legal rights based on those, and they get those privileges based on their preference.
No, so I would disagree. I think that they developed a concept to uniquely set themselves up with the benefits that come from whatever category they were going to, whatever privilege they were going to offer under the United States. And so what they did was said the default, like, for example, with birthright citizenships. Okay, so if the 14th Amendment is overturned, and I imagine, I don't know if they can flat out overturn it, but I think they have to redefine it. But if it's overturned, what automatically happens is we depend on that certificate, that birth certificate, to identify what privileges we have under the Constitution.
I agree.
Now,
No,
so if that goes away, the only person whose privileges will not disappear are those who are white, and the reason why is because of the 1790 law, which says the privileges of the Constitution are automatically granted to you if you are a white person
yes, and lived here for 2 years.
and lived here for 2 years. So
Okay,
it has.
and so
So the
yes, I agree with that.
preference follows the privilege.
I think the preference leads. That's how they got to the privilege. And if they didn't have a preference, they wouldn't put it in a they wouldn't codify it in the law.
But they
was
did.
still the privilege.
But and here's where I think our difference might lie is there was no whiteness, so therefore they created something to put
Because
the people they wanted to select in,
the people they prefer.
and there was a debate on a regular basis, and it was given to anybody based on complexion until 1922.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's back up and look at the Carmelo Anthony. But I have something else to say about the Carmelo Anthony.
Okay, and I got a couple more videos to throw out there too.
Yeah. But thing of it is this. So on one hand, he and I don't want to say this flippantly, but he put himself in that situation in a sense that at some point, young men have to. That's why I don't mind a good fight between boys.
Mm-hmm.
If you've had a fight, you get your butt kicked, you go home. You don't bring a gun, you don't bring a knife. And the hyper emotionalism of these young men that are raised by women, and I don't know if that's the case with him. I don't know. So I'm speaking in very broad generalities.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, everybody has to value life. And knowing that if I bring a gun to a fight, no matter who that is, no matter what color they are, am I valuing life? Because if you get into a fight, more than likely that the chances of someone being seriously harmed are very slim when they're that age. And young men in our communities are so hyper emotional that what should have been just a fight turned into something else.
Well, and so let me say this. Now, I don't disagree with that. I do think generally, and I think that applies across the board, black, white, or anything else.
Yeah.
Here's where I think there is a difference. Now, I know your mom told us, me and your brother and the rest of us, the same thing my mama told. They reminded us that we were black kids and told us, don't be going out there expecting that you should get treated the same way as those white kids. Don't go out there when the police stop you. There were some rules that you needed to follow. There were some things you needed to do. There was some, and so what it made it very clear to us at that particular point is that fairness was not, don't expect fairness. Don't expect equality. Don't expect all that stuff. Recognize that as an African-American male, you are going to be treated with a disadvantage because of your skin color, and in our case, because you are boys. And so those things are very clear. Mr. Pickens preached that to us on a regular basis. We heard that on a regular basis. And so we were prepared to live in a system that does not see us equal. Now, and let me say this. I think that his generation, and the generation, we have not prepared them. And we definitely have not prepared them for the disenfranchisement that is being blanketed over the Black community now. They have no idea. I heard one guy say, "I don't care if we don't get to vote because I don't vote anyway." I'm like, you don't even get it. But I remember. So in the 1960s, mid 60s is when they made the decision, but the application of equal voice at the voting booth continued to struggle throughout most of the 70s. So I grew up with that. And so I know what's being taken away. We've been given this for 60 years, and now you took it away again because the experiment of equality did not pan out in a way to where the white advantage was still available. So therefore, they really sought to take it away because we could end up with a Black president, And so I think, but having people who had no idea about our lives, like there are white people who genuinely thought slavery was helping Black people, genuinely thought it, as ridiculous as it sounds to us, genuinely thought it because of the distance from where they were to its reality. And then secondly, because there's nobody at the table when policies being made that looks like or has experienced anything that we have experienced. So if you don't tell your kids that, if those kids don't know that, they're going to think I can cry self-defense and I will get a fair trial. They think that. And every Black kid, especially Black young man, should know that that will never happen in this age and time in America.
Well, and that's where, okay, so that gets me to the concept of woke. I know that is such, well, the right or conservatives, evangelicals, Christian, who, as they call themselves, say woke is a dirty word, the bad word.
Well, they related to the farthest, most immoral behavior that takes place.
Yeah, but the original meaning of woke was rooted in Americans in the South in the 1920s, alerting other people of the systematic racial prejudice and discriminations that we face. In the 1920s and 30s, Marcus Garvey always told us to stay awake to our social conditions, which we failed to do to our children. And later, how the actual term came about was a blues man named Leadbelly, who used a song about the Scottsboro Boys to warn Black men about the dangers of the Jim Crow South. And he began to tell them, be careful and stay woke when you drive through these towns. And so we had a song about that. So in the 1960s, then we had a song that came about, was said, hey, if you're woke, you dig it, basically. And so that was that concept that we were always in our songs, in our writings, telling each other to stay woke.
Well,
and so our culture changed because our culture changed in a way where it was not about community. And we didn't value, and I believe this is my belief is what we value. And so in our culture and our music begin to change, not around community, but about me showing you what I have. It's an individualistic concept of me over you. And so we failed to tell our kids to stay woke because our culture changed.
Well, there was when I started using the term first, and somebody who is a friend of mine said, you're using a liberal term, which we got into this long discussion about how the term became liberal by claim, and we can't just take words and make them. I mean, even words like gay. I mean, gay was around a long time. Affair was something that precedes the act of, extramarital activity. And so we take our words and we create a context that does not reflect what they potentially meant. But in this case, when it talks about woke, the first time I started using it was because of a passage of scripture. I was trying to think of which scripture where it tells us to wake up and that kind of thing. So I started using it that way, and I just started using the term "stay woke." And then later, somebody pointed out to me, well, when you talk about stay woke, you're talking about far left liberal ideology, which transgender and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, nothing I said related to that whatsoever. But what has happened is, just like DEI, just like you know, the legal systemic understanding of when it comes to race, critical race theory, just like all of those were used to frighten people. Then I think that even the term DAP, remember they used to they kick people out of the army for giving DAP. You know, DAP, you know, like, and
Yeah.
DAP
Okay,
means
but
dignity and pride.
Do you remember when the Obamas gave each other, after Michelle did a speech, Obama gave her a dap?
Right.
And they, Fox News went on this thing of how indignified that was, how, you know, basically ghetto that was. And there was a big uproar about them doing that as he was running for president.
Right, because remember they used to, I mean, back in the day, the Soul Man thing, because what it means is dignity and pride.
Yes, and so they take anything black and make it bad. It's the black bad concept.
That's why and we could talk about this for a long time, but when they said we're not, and it probably was influenced by a conversation I had with a white guy with the N-word. So we used the N-word, you know, as a term of endearment for years, and especially during the time where I grew up. And so then, and we called white people who were part of our group the N-word too. I mean, they were just, you know. And so when they came along, so what this white guy said to me years ago, and he's a friend, he's a good guy. So he says, you think we're gonna let you guys have a word that you can say that we can't say? He said, we're coming after that word because because one of the greatest fears that he said we have is that you guys have always come up with this talk, this job talk, these words, these statements, these saying that doesn't include us, and that brings suspicion amongst white people all the time. I mean, this is a white guy talking to me. Let me play another clip here.
Okay.
About the Anthony case to get us back focused on that.
Strong emotions this week in Texas after a jury found 19-year-old Carmelo Anthony guilty of murder in the stabbing of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. Anthony was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The two teens were high school track athletes at competing schools. They were both 17 at the time of the incident. The jury rejected Anthony's claim that he killed Metcalf in self-defense. The closely watched trial is sparking debate over self-defense, race, and school safety.
This morning, we're joined by attorney Joanne Molinaro to discuss this case and why it has become so divisive. Good morning, Joanne.
Good morning, ladies.
Thanks for being with us. This is a case they're talking about all over the nation, and I know you've talked about it on your Instagram page, so I wanted to have you on to discuss it.
Yeah, well, it's a sad case. It's very, very tragic. We have a young man who lost his life and another young man who's going to be spending a good chunk of his adult life in jail.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one of the sticking points in this case is that all the black jurors were struck from the jury. How is that even legal in 2026?
So to be very specific, there was a large jury pool, about roughly 500 people, and jurors were eliminated for largely legitimate reasons, and included among that were Black American jurors. I think what's causing a lot of controversy, though, is that once the jurors reached the strike pool, which is the area in which prosecutors and defendants counsel can choose to strike certain jurors, all of the black jurors remaining in that strike zone were struck by the prosecutor. Now, think of it kind of like a dinner party. You're planning with your partner, right? Each party gets 10 strikes, and they can strike for any reason other than race or other improper reason. And in this case, the prosecutor said it had nothing to do with race, but it's very eyebrow-raising that all of the remaining black jurors were struck by his strikes.
Wow. Joanne, 19-year-old Carmelo Anthony claimed he stabbed Austin Austin Metcalf in self-defense. So can you explain why that argument didn't hold up with the jurors?
Well, there are really two reasons that probably prevented that from sticking with the jurors. And the first one is a proportionality argument, right? Deadly force is only permitted when there's a, protection of otherwise deadly force. A shove or a push, that doesn't rise to the level of saying, I'm going to take my knife out now and respond in kind. It's not an in-kind response. I think the other reason the jury probably had a problem with that was, of course, the statement that was uttered by the defendant right before he was bullied, which is, you're going to come at me and you're going to find out. And then he reaches into his pocket for that weapon.
Right.
That provoking statement under Texas law prevented an appliance of self-defense as we would otherwise might have seen.
Right. And of course, Anthony's lawyers argued that Metcalf was much larger, and that's why his push was met with a stab. But the jury did not go with that argument. The jury also in Texas decides not only the verdict, but the sentence here. How did that complicate this case?
So in Texas, it's one of like 6 states in the country that permits the jury to derive the sentence. And in this particular case, it was actually defendant who made that election. Now, the defendant elected to have the jury render the sentence before the defendant knew what the makeup of that jury might be. So they took a big gamble here. And in this situation, given the composition of the jury and what we have statistically seen happens when an all-white jury is rendering either a verdict or a sentence to a Black American defendant, some have thought perhaps that is why we're seeing a rather harsh sentence to a 17-year-old defendant.
Wow. Okay, well, before we let you go, we want to ask you if there is any chance for Anthony to appeal his sentence.
So he has already filed a notice of appeal, and there are going to be a number of legal bases for that appeal. Now, appealing a sentence is really, really hard. Under Texas law, it's going to be very hard because this sentence, while some may think it was very hard for a 17-year-old, it fits within the guidelines. It fits within the statutory range. So there is very little chance that this sentence is going to be reduced or thrown out. However, there are certainly bases for throwing out the verdict altogether because of some of the process, issues that we talked about. For example, the jury selection. Exactly.
Well, Joanne, this is a case people are talking about all over the country, so we appreciate your insight into.
All right. So, I don't know the details of the case, but I think there is some reason to examine the choices that were made by the defense.
And that was my issue. I mean, I like to take out as much of the risk as possible to my clients. And I don't know if he, the defense attorneys said this to Carmelo and his family, and they decided to go this way anyway. Okay. So you never know what the situation is, but I try to eliminate the risk as best as possible. As much of the risk that I with someone's life. And so part of this is, but the jury makeup is the huge one. Now I mentioned that earlier. It's just the huge one. I don't know in the population, but this is another thing that plays into it. They normally pick the jury pool from the voter registration. Okay, so if Black people do not register to vote, they don't get on the jury pool. And if you can keep them off, and if you can keep them off from registering to vote, they don't get part of the jury pool. And I've always told my family when they always try to give them an excuse to get off the jury pool, I said, you need to be on the juries.
Right.
You need to be on the juries.
Now, I think in this particular case, I think it was unintentional because they said, the strike, being able to strike out the juries, to know that you are striking out all of the Blacks and say that's not your intent. I think that raises a lot of questions of appeal at the appeals court. I also think now, to me, I would have preferred, I guess, to take my risk in the judge sentencing versus the
Absolutely,
versus the jury
because with the judge, I mean, you got a sentencing memo. I mean, you get to do certain things. Okay,
right.
I mean, you
Yeah.
you get certain things. So that would have been that would have been my advice. Now I don't know what the advice of the attorney, so I'm not going to second guess him. But I want to go back to something, and that's what I was getting at before. So if young men either need to learn how to box, wrestle, or something, and stop picking up a gun
You know,
and a
so
knife. And I'm sick,
so I want to
and
have a
maybe
whole. I want to have a whole show on that part because
okay,
I do think,
okay,
yeah, I do think that. I remember when knives first came in. I remember when me and your brother and them had got our first guns. You know, we was running the streets. You know, there was. So we'll have a conversation on that.
yeah, we could do that. So looking at this case, I think there's blame to go around everywhere.
But the bottom line issue is the question is, can a black person get a fair trial in many counties in our country?
There is nothing fair about this country towards blacks in general.
And so now socially, I get that, and socially, I understand that. The question is, I think the answer, of course, is no. And the reason why it's no is not because of how people feel. I don't think it's even because of people's preference as much as you do. I think is driven by the fact that we have given privilege, default privilege, to a social construct that we don't fit in.
Okay, but like when an individual goes to a jury room, or an individual decides if they're going to hire someone, it's based on that, and their preference is based on the social construct of and the propaganda that's been levied against African American men and African Americans in general about who's valued and who's not.
But I think, but I think that like everything, you know, you've been to appeals court before, and you know, you make arguments, and the law and case law helps make those arguments.
Correct.
And all of those things are really driven by a system of hierarchy based on a social contract. Like
not in a jury, but not in a jury. I'm gonna tell you something.
In the jury, but the pretrial arguments, where you decide what the questions are, all of that is, I think, systemically part of that system.
Well, I mean, the attorneys get to make up those questions.
Right, you're debating that, and the judge is going to determine which ones stick and which ones don't.
Well, he can object and things like that, but you get to. So, but the issue is it's a preference, and that preference denotes the privilege. And so the process in this is America has a preference, and I'll say it like this: they have a value system that values white supremacy.
And I think that value system is driven by who has rights and privileges, both civil and legal.
I don't disagree with that part of it, but it's based on their preference. And so when you look at, okay, and you and I shared clips this week on dealing with Asian Americans and their
right.
So that they're white supremacists as well. So some black people can be white supremacists as well because they value and they have a preference for what is considered okay. And that is based on a preference, and they're trying to make and they're thinking about the individual and not the community.
Well, I would say this. Okay, so now here's where that argument can be challenged. I think Asian Americans will tell you, especially those who you meet who are coming to this country, that proximity to whiteness is your greatest opportunity, will breed your greatest opportunity to success. for me, having Troy in the car was more safe for me than having Harvey in the car, even though Harvey was a much better friend. I would say that what Asians were told was, listen, we'll give you a form of reparations and we'll give you loans and everything else as long as you go into the Black community, because we do not want you taking, in other words, anything that is disposable legally and anything that we do not honor the benefits legally so Asians are told, listen, you go over there and you take their money. We don't want you living over there because then you'll be putting the money back into the community. We don't want you taking and getting wealth from Black people, and we don't want to so what we want to do is we want to put your business over in the Black community so that we can say we're supporting minorities and won't have to give it to them. You're in the game now that legally positions them at the lowest element of the totem pole, because we don't want no more Black Wall Streets around here. So therefore, in order for them to not have the stores that circulates their money within their company, we want you as Asians. Now, in 1922, you wanted to be closer to whiteness. We would not allow you to be under the cover of whiteness. What we will do is we will allow you to benefit as a certain or a special group of indentured servants who can go into the communities and take the money out of there.
They gave them a privilege based on their preference of having, we would prefer Asians over Blacks. And so the issue is always a preference, and it's based on their value system. And this is my issue with other minority groups when dealing with Black people, because they haven't valued our blood, our sweat, our tears. They got them their privileges. And their privileges were based on our blood, our sweat, our tears. The civil rights movement, they would not have the civil rights that they have had it not been for African Americans standing up over and over, from dealing with slavery, dealing with Jim Crow, then dealing with the Black codes, then dealing with the whole concept.
But I think all of that is rooted in this idea that of superiority versus inferiority. So the fact that when we give it to them, they prove us to be disingenuous with this legal decision that was made in 1790. And that is what the Confederate, because here's our biggest deficiency right now, is that we keep arguing Democrat or Republican. I mean, that two-tier system has never been for us. And so we're evaluating us. We're distracted by the Confederacy versus Union.
Well, I think, we're making a choice of what's the lesser evil. And I think that's an adult, an adult thing to do.
But we're not arguing against the Confederate movement that's taken place, because the South had a three-tier view of citizenship, the Confederates. And what the Confederate Army fights for and consistently fights against is who gets privileges. And so all of the civil privileges, all the legal privileges should be given to white people as the first tier. Second tier, indentured servants. Third tier are people who are property. That's the ideology that they still run with. And if you go out on these farms where people don't know anything about the complications of society, but they're consistently voting for Trump. They're voting for Trump because that Confederate ideology is embedded in almost everything that he says. And that sounds like the good old days for them.
Yes, it's white supremacy. It's their preference. And I always go back to that. But ultimately, it is the value that they place on human beings.
Right, which is the three. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the three tier.
Exactly, but it's based on their preference of, we would much rather be around these people because we value these people.
I think they come secondly. I think that most white people, like sometimes you can go, and this is what I tell some of the Blacks, because this is a conversation that we don't have. Like, I have a lot of white friends. I have a lot of folks who, like, my friendship is pretty much across the board. However, I understand when I am going to do a contract, that when I walk into that room, who has automatically been given privilege enough so that your first look, your first impression impacts the outcome of what's going to take place. Now, that's because my grandfather had those conversations with me, and because Mr. Pickens had those conversations with us, because your mother had those conversations with us, telling us, here's who you are in the country. Let's well say that even if everybody said, so kids go to school, and like I'm thinking of one kid in mind, let's take them out to Shawnee Mission and let's put them in at least some school so he'll have a better opportunity. I think the more you bring him in proximity to whiteness, the more you have to make sure that he clearly understands that those privileges don't rub off on you.
Well, but I think this. I also don't want to limit anyone's capacity.
I don't think you
based
limit
on-
their capacity.
No.
What you do is you change their strategy.
Okay, yeah. And so my point of it is this. Although my mother said life isn't fair, but I also had Buzzy, like my father figure who came alongside me when I was 12, 13 years old, who was a dentist that stayed in the neighborhood, and told me, brothers are bad, and meaning good. And so what he said, so what he told me is, you, no matter what they say about you, no matter what they say or what they do about you, man, you know, we are the best of the best. We've lived through the Middle Passage. We lived through slavery, and he would talk about our inventions. He would talk about everything we've done, and he said,
I
"Hey,
get all that.
So don't
But it's
ever
not
limit
one
yourself."
versus the other.
Yeah,
It's
but
not one
I'm not
versus the
saying
other.
I'm not
I
saying
think
one
you
versus the
gotta
other.
do both. If you
Yeah.
just do one, if you just do one, if you just tell me how great I am, I am
Yes.
going to be shocked because you've taught me
Yes.
how to swim in 3 feet and threw me into 9 feet. So I think that you got to say you are bad. You can make it through this. You got to tell me the history of my heritage, all that kind of stuff, which my grandfather did really, really well. And you also got to say, and this is what it takes to win. You got
Yes,
to tell me.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, you got to
So
tell me I remember my coach used to say, there are many times you're going to play when we're playing basketball. There are many times where you're going to play. You guys are going to play 5 against 7. And so I got to teach you how to play a certain kind of way rather than have you out there stomping around talking about what's fair.
Exactly.
Now, I do want to play a clip of the judge. It's about a 2-minute clip
Okay.
of the judge who tried the case, and this is kind of his argument.
Carmelo Anthony is beginning tonight a prison sentence expected to span decades after being convicted of murder. For the first time, the judge who oversaw the track meet stabbing trial is speaking out, telling Jobin Puneker he stands by the way that case was handled.
You could say it was a trial unlike any other, but it means more coming from the judge who's presided many trials over 20 years.
I'll take it.
Judge John Roach.
Every time.
What he said when assigned this murder trial, where a jury convicted Carmelo Anthony and sentenced him 35 years. The judge tells us they prepped for this trial 8 months out.
And I know I made people mad, but I'm not here to make them happy either.
The decision to not allow cameras or streaming was questioned by journalists, even the public. The fight for limited public seats turned into lines as early as 2 in the morning.
Yes, it was an easy decision, and I'll tell you why. My primary goal in any case is to make sure that the defendant and the prosecution gets a fair trial, period.
Judge Roach says he was aware of all the noise outside the courthouse. It was his job to make sure it didn't affect the jury and what happened inside.
Did the jury get it right?
Yeah, they did. You know why? Because they were picked based upon the law. They listened to the facts that happened here in this very courtroom, and they got a verdict.
The judge says Collin County should be the model for handling high-profile cases.
For as long as I follow the law, I sleep well at night. I don't think it's my job to feed social media or the media.
We ended our interview asking about his brief interactions with the now convicted Carmelo Anthony.
He seems like a nice young man who committed a crime. And he understands today, more than any day before today, the consequences of committing a crime like he did.
This will be Judge Roach's last big murder trial. His service ends in 6 months, but he will preside over 1 or 2 more murder trials before then and apply these same standards.
The parking lot won't be full. The gallery won't be full of people watching the case, but we still have somebody who's died and someone accused of doing the killing.
In Collin County, I'm Jovan Point.
Thoughts? And then we're going to have to begin to wrap up because I got to.
Yeah, he is there to justify the system, and he gets a privilege, and a preference for justifying. Of course, he's going to defend it because he's basically sees himself as a system. I mean, every time that you attack racism, when people come to defense of racism because they so align that with my idea is that's not surprising. His response is
Not surprising. So now, here's the deal. So we're going to have to begin to wrap up. So I have some videos that I did not get a chance to put on there and so we may talk about this a little bit more, maybe even a couple of extra podcasts for this. But part of it is lengthy discussions about Black people who are Fox News people, some other kind of folks that they have on some of these stations that are defending, that said that this was not a problem of race, has nothing to do with race, has something to do with crime, and Black people are at fault because we always justify crime, and they just go on and on and on and on. Now, here's the deal. All of those conversations, here's the thing I always get, even with the lawyer that was on the news clip that we saw, they always try to go find a minority to explain things. So to me, it's almost like you are tilting your hand of guilt because you go find somebody who is a minority to explain the minority view. So in this particular case, this Fox News, and Black people on Fox News.
Yeah.
So they come up with it. So it's a Black guy and it's a Black woman, and she's a professor at some university, and she comes on and talk about this is deeply rooted in the Black crime, and she almost says we are inherently violent, and she goes on and says all this kind of stuff or whatever. I want to have a conversation about those people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's have a conversation about those people. But I think there's another conversation we need to have as well. I am upset with Black people that are willing to come out and protest at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Who don't go vote.
Okay. All right.
And they would call, like, let's say, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
They're the sellouts.
Okay.
They have sold out our culture because they're emotional reacting after the fact. They've done nothing ahead of time. They don't know our history. And they perpetuate this devaluing of Blackness, who we are. And that's so my thing of it is,
when we have that conversation, I do want to perhaps go into some detail about the few times I've been offered the opportunity to be one of those people, and what they were willing to give me to be one of those.
And so, that's my issue. And I have an issue with, and some of my family members, on 4th of July, they'll wear their kente colors and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself, they haven't read anything about our history.
So they're perpetrating.
They're perpetrating, and they think that's Black. And you know, Buzzy would have told me back in the day, you know, he explained to me who Chappie was, the first horse charge. I mean, he explained to me history and what it means to excel when no one wanted us to. They went against us at all costs. That's blackness. That's greatness. That's value. And we're not valuing ourselves. And so when these young ladies see themselves as a commodity, it's unvalued.
All right, so we're going to be signing off now, and we'll jump back on. If we can work out a time, we'll jump on an extra time or two just to get the content out there, just to make up for the week that we missed. But we appreciate that you guys are sticking with us. We appreciate you, even if you're getting the podcast information after the fact. We noticed some of our folks our listeners and people who are coming with us are starting to increase, and we really appreciate that. So we ask that you would like, share, and subscribe. Did I get it all right? On whatever platform you are catching us on. And we will see you next time.